Thank you for coming out to the first Tuesday Toast of the year. This is the WIC, also known as Maryland Women's Center. Nice to WIC. And thank you all for being here so much. Tuesday Toast. This is how it got started. If you all don't know, if you're freshmen and you're new, I went to this camp. And at this camp, they have this idea that everyone deserved a parade. And so they literally went to the post office and had a parade for this one little lady. And she just marched down, and there was bands and everything, and it was super awesome, and it was so empowering. And so from there, I got this idea that everyone at Sewanee is doing awesome things. Everyone's amazing, they're supporting organizations, they're doing activism, and they just need to share it. And if they share it, even more people can get involved, and even more people can support it. So that's Tuesday Toast. So I hope you enjoy the lemonade and the toast if you got some. And this is Mary Ottley. Mary Ottley is a senior. She's the house manager, right, of the Coho, the Community Engagement House. And she's been probably one of the most involved people at Sewanee that I know. So this, I mean, it's the perfect first Tuesday Toast, I think. And so without further ado, let's welcome Mary.
So Michelle spoiled the first intro to my talk by posting the quote I was going to read on the Facebook page. That was perfect. So if you didn't see it, I'm going to read it. And it says, Bangladesh ... is an atmosphere that grips our senses so ardently it becomes a part of our experience of ourselves. As a place, Bangladesh leaves an impression as difficult to erase as it is to fasten to memory. And that last phrase is kind of what I want to talk about today. As difficult as it is to fasten to memory as it is to erase. So I am a senior at Sewanee, obviously, and I spent this summer in Dhaka, Bangladesh with a really internship, with Basic Needs Bangladesh, and that is an organization that essentially attempts to provide Bangladeshi people with their basic needs. So healthcare, education, employment, whatever you can think of, that entire gamut of basic needs. And now I'm back in Sewanee after what was a radically different experience in Asia. And I'm in classes, and I'm living in the community engagement house with some wonderful women and other people. But it's all women, so it could be the women's center, but you guys have guys, so that's awesome. We're taking over that realm now. Yeah. And I am in a very different place than I was this summer, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today in terms of horizons. So I'm in Appalachian Religion with some people. It's a great class, so you should take it. It's with Gerald Smith, and he is kind of this Sewanee legend who's been here for a lot of years. I don't know how many. And right now we're talking about horizon and the slope of Appalachia. I've been talking about this with a lot of people recently because it's been very much on my mind in applying my summer to my time in Sewanee right now. And you all can't see this, but it's little mountains that are drawn horribly because I don't have much skill in terms of artistic ability. And there are little people in the bottom of these coves. And so it's basically this idea that when you're in Sherwood or you're anywhere down in the valley that surrounds Sewanee, your sight is really limited. And so it's a half a mile or a mile, and all you can see surrounding you is trees and mountains and nature that is beautiful, but really limits your sight. And so Smith asked us in class, what's your view of the world? And that can be taken so literally, obviously. You know, we at Sewanee, we can go to Green Tea, we can see the beautiful valley surrounding us. And he said, if it's that, you have vision. And if it's not, you don't have vision. And so Michelle, when she was prepping me for this, was asking me a bit of a list of questions that kind of geared my mind around how I got to Bangladesh. And I think it's because my view of the world was kind of like a person in one of those coves. Like, here's Mary Ottley, in a tiny crack of the world. And my view is half a mile and all I see is trees. So I grew up in Marietta, Georgia, which is like 20 minutes from Atlanta, and I traveled to school in Atlanta to a private school every day, and just constantly had highways to look at. And once I got to school, I was in a very affluent part of Atlanta, and if I continue on that same highway, 10 minutes from my house is an organization called Trinity House, and this is a home for homeless men in Atlanta. They basically have a rehabilitation program for them. And I volunteered there throughout high school, and then my senior year of high school, right after I graduated, took a class called Philanthropy 101 at Westminster. Some of you have probably heard me talk about this, but it's a 4 or 6 week course that takes you to different nonprofits around Atlanta, and Trinity House was one of them. So I had volunteered there a lot in high school, but began to see this place in a totally different way. I was seeing what makes a nonprofit run, how people are donating their money to this nonprofit, where is it being used, et cetera, et cetera. And then one week during that class, CARE, which is an international nonprofit based in Atlanta, came and spoke to our class. And I've been volunteering for Trinity House, like I knew of all these organizations in Atlanta, but that one totally stuck out to me. So this is a nonprofit that basically centers all their work around women and children. And I was blown away. Pretty much had been just driving up and down the highway, going to Trinity House, doing the same old thing, and had never considered issues on a grander scale before. And so that was a bit of like the first piece that kind of got my mind going about what do issues look like for women and children. And then I came to Swanee, and we don't have highways here, which is great. I love that. But again, like my vision became very different, and I took a Women's and Gender Studies class with Dr. Verbitsky. Very exciting things happened in that class, and embarrassing ones as well. But that's a story for another day. And I started to see, again, like all of these women's issues coming out and how that really involved women in charity and, again, on a global scale. And so then I was a freshman and I was like, what am I going to do to get involved in Swanee? And I applied to live in the Women's Center and applied for a canali that's called SWEEK, which I did my sophomore year, took a break junior year, and now we started up again senior year, so ladies out there, you can all apply for it. We'll talk about that later. And I was like, okay, this is kind of where I feel that I'm being called. This is getting to be a long story, so I'll start to wrap it up. But basically, I felt from that moment when I encountered CARE for the first time that service has always been a really big part of my life, but in what ways is my heart really being ignited over a certain issue? And that really became women's issues. So I applied for the Lily, and I was like, I know that this is kind of where my life is going in this certain direction. And the Lily it's called the Lily Summer Discernment Institute, and it's all about vocational discernment for a life of service. Did I get that right, Robin? Okay. And so I was like, all right, well, I know that this is something that I want to do with my life, and I know that I'm passionate about women's issues, but I still am kind of confused as to all of that. And so I applied for the Lily basically under the premise of I want to go and be in a place where I can have the opportunity to really encounter these issues firsthand. So I applied for the basic needs internship, thinking that I was going to go change the world from day one. That did not happen. And was basically going there to intern in their education sector. They have a school in a rural village in Bangladesh, and to help implement and start this health program. So I was like, yes, I'm going to go there. This is going to be fabulous. I will change all of these women's lives. I'll, immediately get started in the school. I'll immediately start this health clinic from the ground up, and it will be awesome by the time I leave. And I get jet lag, and I get really sick. And I think she's somewhere in here. Maybe not.
I'm here.
Yes, she is this amazingly kind Florence Nightingale soul that nursed me back to health when I was just really sick in Dhaka. And so that was a really big thing for me this summer, was all of these expectations, and I kind of didn't realize that I was in this very tiny cove until I got to this place, and the atmosphere of Bangladesh, kind of that phrase there, it says that grips our senses so ardently. I didn't really anticipate that. So I got there thinking that I was going to go and have this amazing service experience without fully comprehending the reality of international service work and development work. So I got to Dhaka, got really sick, and was sort of miserable at the beginning. And I think that that's really important to kind of point out, because we constantly gain these impressions that service is just this awesome thing that makes you feel great and you're going to go and change the world. And I really kind of needed to be humbled in order to gain the enlightening experience that I really had while I was there. So that was a bit of the reason why I was in Dhaka, and what led me to pursue this internship, and how I became involved, and why Bangladesh, because it was just vastly different from anything that I had ever experienced before. And I sought out Richie, who is the president and CEO of Basic Needs. He's a Swanee grad, so that was a really easy connection to kind of get me over there. So if any of you want to do that here, I'll be more than willing to help you out. But again, kind of going into this, I faced just a lot of obstacles while I was there. And the first, I would say, is I kind of had a different picture of the organization that is a reality of looking at Nina, because we kind of went there thinking that we would be immediately involved and immersed in these service projects. But we really had to take a step back and look at the immediate need of what Basic Needs was facing. And so right now, as an organization, they're over there, and in the United States they're recognized as a nonprofit, but in Bangladesh they're not, because it's a very corrupt system to actually get your restitution. And I feel awkward being filmed, because I feel someone from Bangladesh is going to be like, anyways, so they're not acknowledged as a nonprofit there, so they're struggling to get funding for the school. It started a few months later than it actually was supposed to, because they couldn't get the money for the school supplies or to pay the teachers or anything like that. So that was kind of our abrupt stepping back and really assessing the situation of, I'm in Dhaka, I want to hit the ground running, but I'm really sick, and I don't know what the heck is going on with this organization. And I'm just going to have to accept the fact that I can't immediately do what I came here to do. So that was where all of these other just glorious, enlightening insights happened in terms of development work. So again, taking a step back, I was in Haiti over spring break, and we were working pretty closely with Partners in Health, because the agriculture project that Swanee is doing there right now is kind of facilitated through Partners in Agriculture, which is kind of a branch of Partners in Health. So this year has been really big in terms of me understanding systems of poverty, and so I was really introduced to healthcare as a system of poverty in March. And so that again became a really big thing for me while I was in Bangladesh, is learning that people cannot be helped and given, employment opportunities, etc., if they're dying from diarrheal diseases. And it sounds so simplistic, but it's just something that I've never really conceived of before. It was just acknowledging that healthy bodies mean healthy communities. And that is so present here at Swanee as well, in such a variety of ways. And obviously we're not facing, the nutrition problems because we eat well, be well, Chef Rick. But we face things like sexual assault that are real bodily issues, and when we are harmed in that way, we cannot be healthy in the same capacity that we would be if things like that weren't occurring. So that was a really big thing for me, which I was able to understand because I myself was getting sick. And a big phrase that stuck out to me this summer was equality in disease. And yes, I know that impoverished people are far more likely to get sick. But there I was in a place where I was suffering from dehydration just as much as a kid when I was walking through the slum, that his literally disabled, dying body was being loaded into a rickshaw because he got diarrhea for the past week and a half. And there's so many images that come to my mind in terms of seeing these people that were unhealthy, and that was really eye-opening for me because I don't think that I've been in a place where bodies were just not in the same capacity, functioning in the same way that they do here in the States. So that was very interesting. And those were some of the problems and obstacles along the way, were these really harsh realities that I was having to face while also being in a place as a nonprofit intern trying to make an impact. And so I kind of think that I have this impression going into it, like I said, of I'm going to change the world day one, I'm going to go and help these people, when even before I left for DACA, I was like, no, Mary, you just need to learn, you need to learn, you need to learn. But we can say that all day long when our minds are thinking, I am the solution. We are not. And so really this summer, it was one of learning, and it was one that my goal that I set out with was what I accomplished in the end. I just really got lost along the way, which happens. And so that was just a really big thing, was acknowledging the embodiment of humans. And I read this book this summer, and I've talked about it too, about everyone that I've seen. It's called An Altar in the World by Barbara Bell Taylor, and I just want to read you guys one passage. It's all about spiritual practices, so you might not relate to that side of things, but it's still, I think, very valuable no matter what your faith background is and all of that. So she says, when understanding finally came, not by reason but by faith, the first thing I understood was that it was not possible to trust that God loved all of me, including my body, without also trusting that God loved all bodies everywhere. God loved the bodies of hungry children and indentured women, along with the bodies of sleek athletes and cigar-smoking tycoons. While we might not have one other thing in common, we all wore skin. We all had breath and beating hearts. Most of us had wept, although not for the same reasons. Few of our bodies worked the way we wanted them to. The vast majority of us were afraid of dying. One of the truer things about bodies is that it is just about impossible to increase the reverence I show mine without also increasing the reverence I show yours. However differently you and I may conceive the world, God or one another, physical reality is something we can usually agree on. When the temperature drops below 32 degrees, I am as cold as whoever happens to be standing next to me. When I see someone run into a piece of furniture, catching the corner of a table right in the thigh, my own thigh hurts in that same place. It always does. When I am sitting next to someone in a meeting and our stomachs growl at the same time, again, this is always me, we both shift in our seats, unable to ignore a connection more fundamental than knowing each other's names. Wearing my skin is not a solitary practice, but one that brings me into communion with all these other embodied souls. Read from the perspective of the body, just talking about Jesus, his ministry was about encountering those whose flesh was discounted by the world in which they lived. And so that's just such a great kind of paraphrasing of was encountering vastly different people with very different views from mine, and acknowledging the things we have in common, the things that are different about us, but the fact that we are both people. And a really big thing for me this summer was I was in Bangladesh, which is a Muslim country, and I was there during Ramadan, so everybody was fasting and not drinking water, and I actually would have died had I not been eating and drinking water. But one day I did fast with the host family that I was staying with, and to be able to understand kind of the religious significance behind that, and the cultural significance behind that was a really empowering thing. And I remember at the end of the day, I had this, what they call a chicken burger, in front of me, and I was about to eat it, and Sean says, before you take a bite of that, Mary, think about all the starving kids in the slums that you've been encountering, and that gives a real perspective to the reason why we've been fasting. And I had so many moments like that of just like utter lack of the words to say, and humility, and just having to just sit and be this summer, because I was overwhelmed by this fact that we are wearing skin. And that sounds probably ridiculous, but it was one of the greatest things that I really gained from this experience, was just seeing people in a different way than I had previously. So I'm moving down the list of questions that Michelle asked, and what were some of the events and programs that we were in charge of. So Dina and I got to take a couple of village trips, and that was my favorite part by far. So again, kind of harkening back to Haiti and Ecuador the year before that, we had been in places where we were experiencing really rural poverty, and then like immediately juxtaposing that with urban poverty. So you drive through Port-au-Prince to get to Cannes, which is where we spent the majority of our time on the Haiti outreach trip. And I was in Dhaka, Bangladesh, which is got so many people living in it. They said officially 20 million people and unofficially 40 million people, which Rishan, the 13-year-old, told me 40 million, so he might be a little off base. But still, that's a lot of people in one city. And it just is kind of, again, like going back to this notion of limited sight and what is your horizon. Because I was in Dhaka, and I would look out the window, and I would just see concrete building after concrete building after concrete building. And I'd pretty much gone to Bangladesh right after being in Swanee, where we have, 13,000 acres to run around on, and I felt like I was just in a tiny cage the whole time I was there. So I was very glad to gain a bit of sight and vision, as Smith called it, by going into the villages. And it's crazy, kind of the difference in those two places while being in the same country. So similar to Haiti, Bangladesh is really suffering from centralization. So all the resources, all the employment, everything is located right in Dhaka. And when you're in the rural villages, there's not much there. They haven't really figured out how to utilize resources that are in those villages and create employment opportunities for the people living in them. So I stayed in a village home with like 13 women 1 week that I was there, and all of their husbands and all of the men in that family were farming in Dhaka or were attached to garment factories in some capacity, and these women were just kind of living it up, which I was enjoying, in the villages, and they really didn't have the capacity building programs to create gainful employment. So, or have health care. So we kept going to all these hospitals in Dhaka, which weren't amazing by any standard, but were at least there. And when you were in a village, the nearest healthcare facilities, 20, 30 miles away, depending on how close to Dhaka you are. And there are, remote clinics, but nothing too substantial. And so we got to go to these villages and put on kind of mobile health clinics. And that was really the project that we worked on while we were in Dhaka, was creating basic needs is yeah, I guess that's how you'd say it. New health project. And so again, like with all of the organizational stuff that they're struggling with, we had to start small, and that would pretty much be scaled up over time. So one of my favorite things was encountering all the community health workers that we were around this summer. Just awesome women who have gained all of these skills with different training programs from BRAC, which is one of the biggest nonprofits there. I'm sure you guys have heard of Grameen Bank. BRAC is pretty similar to that. They do microfinancing and a bunch of different health projects. If you've taken Mohita, you've heard about BRAC. And so there we were in villages, like gaining different perspectives of health programs and kind of how can we create a health project for basic needs. And so really the health clinic was the biggest thing for me this summer, besides doing like strategic planning and memorandums of understanding between different organizations and all of that kind of stuff, which was useful skills, but probably not what I'm most interested in. And so that was really cool, just in seeing, again, like health in communities, and how these women are coming together to sustain life for themselves and for their children in these villages. And so that was pretty much like the work that we did with basic needs. So now it's like coming back into Swanee after what was a very impactful summer, and how do I translate all that I learned into my life now, because I won't be in Asia for at least, the next 9 months that we're in school. And I think the biggest thing has been just this idea of health and then hospitality that I learned while I was over there. I think that a lot of times I shy away from encountering people in a capacity that I don't want to encounter them, and I was really stripped of that barrier this summer. This is like a disgusting story that's way too much TMI, but Nina's here, so I have to share it. I was really sick, one of the multiple times that I was really sick this summer. Spicy food and me just do not get along well, I learned, and lack of water. But I was like really sick one night and did not think that I was going to be like sick to the point of throwing up. And at one point I just wake up and start throwing up everywhere, which is disgusting. I shouldn't have told y'all that. But I tell you that story because I couldn't make it to the squat toilet that I became really familiar with, and just threw up all over our floor. And Ina is sitting there in the room with me, which I'm like deathly afraid to throw up, so if that had ever happened to me, I would have been like, ah, started running out of the room. My brothers know that very well. And so Ina's sitting there like in our tiny room at the desk, my throat probably getting like all over her. And she just immediately comes over, starts patting my back, and is like, baby, you're gonna be okay, like, angelic soul. She's in the back. You have to stand up now. Anyways, so she's awesome. And seriously, Florence Nightingale, and I was in that moment like stripped of any just privacy that I would want during that time. And I know that's a very gross story, but I tell you that because I think it's so just showing of how people were exactly what I needed this summer, and really became such a source of strength for me in a way that I had never really experienced before. And it's kind of this notion of hospitality and radical hospitality, which is like, you all probably know Eileen Schaefer, and she hosts those dinners, and now Daniel Williams does it, but it's in kind of a principle from Saint Benedict. Is that right, Annie? And she knows all about that. And just this notion of we are to give like ourselves fully. And Barbara Brown Taylor talks about that a lot too, and it's kind of mentioned in that same passage of we are meant to encounter each other with our bodies, and I am a person that I don't always like to do that. I kind of like to encounter people in the way that I want to, in the time that I want to, and I was, again, just strict of that this summer. And it was so incredible to see the ways in which people were caring for me. Because I came to care for people this summer and to, I don't know, be the Bangladeshi Mother Teresa. And it was really incredible in the way that that role was totally reversed. Just another kind of sickness story. So, not that gross of detail, but I was again sick a different time, and so many times. And Shohan and his wife Nusrat were like, okay, this is the worst you've been, Mary. We have like got to do something about this. So they brought me into their bed, which like bringing someone into what is your sacred territory, that was such an act of hospitality to me. Put me on their bed and this is like how in Bangladesh you get people's core temperature down, is they basically just pour water all over you. And I was like laying there, and I was like, okay, well, let's do it. And they're like mumbling in Bengali, and like at the end of the sentence they say malaria, and I was like, no! I was like, I promise I've been taking my malaria medicine, this cannot be happening. And I'm like going in and out of like haziness, and they're like pouring this water all over me, and at one point Sean was like, Mary, you have to let me take care of you. In somewhat broken English, but I understood it. And that was just kind of where I was at the point of saying, okay, like, well, 5 minutes before that, I'd be like, okay, God, take me now. Like, I'm done in this life. But that was just the point where I had to say it's pretty okay and say, I'm just going to pretty much like give up in my attempt to help these people and learn what, in my opinion, is God has brought me here to teach me. And so that was just pretty incredible experience. Was to be totally humbled, and I'm honestly very thankful for all the sickness that happened, because I think it kind of got me out of the perspective of thinking, all right, I'm going to make vast change in this country. No, that takes like 20, 30 years to make an impact in a place like that. And the country's only like the size of Iowa, so a lot of people in a small place. But I think it was just one of those moments where I had to relinquish all control. And I'm going to read one last thing from Barbara Taylor. Clearly she was like very awesome in my summer. But this was her talking about an ice storm. And she said, having no power, she means electricity. But I mean like physical power. Having no power, I discovered how much I could actually do. I was made to exceed my self-interest for a while, expanding my circle of concern to include every living thing in my vicinity. I was deprived of my usual defenses against cold, darkness, and hardship, giving me a better sense of how most people live. I was forced to engage the brute requirements of staying alive on frozen earth, leading me to fresh appreciation of a body that works. And that was so just indicative of my summer, that I was deprived of my usual defenses, like being in Swanee, being, I don't know, kind of smart, and, you know, succeeding in classes and that sort of thing. That I was in a place where I didn't know what I was doing, and I had so much to learn. And Will Watson is the assistant acting program director, shared a quote with me that said, and it's all about kind of like that notion of I'm here to help you, and it's set from the perspective of one of those people that's being helped. And it says, if you're here to help me, go ahead and leave. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let's start this journey together. And that's paraphrasing it. But that was what was really my summer, was learning that, you know, I was equal to these people that I was encountering in really dark, dank slums, that I wore the same skin that they do, and that I had a lot to learn from them. And so Michelle asked me, you know, where does this take me going forward? And I am hoping to pursue a career in international development, service, nonprofit work, all that kind of stuff. And I think that this summer was maybe the most valuable summer I could have had going forward, because without learning that lesson of I'm not here to change your life, I'm not here to help you, I'm not here to provide you with all the resources that you can't provide yourself, I learned what it really looks like to be kind of a humble servant, to go and live in communities because I want to get to know the people that live in them. And that sort of is like long term, but in this year in Swanee, Lilibel Liebrand's, I don't know if she's here, but we're friends. And she and I are doing a canale that's called SWEEK, which stands for Swanee Women Engaging and Empowering Community. And I started sophomore year, and now it looks a lot different senior year. But it's all about establishing intentional relationships and building community here amongst Swanee women. So a lot of you are here, and you all can apply for it if you like. But it's basically getting women together in groups with community members and pretty much facilitating conversation of each other's story. And that was just so what I learned this summer, especially in terms of that whole wearing skin thing. We all have a story, we all have something to share. And how can we learn from each other in the ways that I learned from a heck of a lot of Bangladeshi people and people in Swanee like me. And how can we go forward and kind of realize that our liberation is bound up in one another. And so that's just like that, and being a senior, I think, has just provided me with a lot of clarity of what are the great things about Swanee and what are some things that we can hope to change while we are students here. But how can we foster, a healthy community? Because health was such a big thing for me this summer, and just realizing that health isn't just, our physical being, but that healthy communities are ones that are healthy physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, and in every capacity. So that was my summer. It was crazy and hard and awesome and everything in between, but just really enhanced by the place and the people that I got to be around. And I would suggest you all apply for the Lily because it was awesome. You get to be in a community of 17 other people that have different internships from you that are learning really similar things. And also become an intern for basic needs. They really need it. But you'll discover a lot in a place that grips your senses very ardently, like Catherine Hummel said in Positive Light, which is a photography book of different Bangladeshi photographers and kind of their feelings and the sense of place of where they're from. So that's where that quote came from. It's not just some random quote off the internet, which my brothers accuse me of using a lot in like high school English papers. But anyways, so yeah, that was my summer, and it was great, and thanks for letting me talk about it, Michelle and Women's Center. I love this place dearly, and I'm happy to be here. Let's give her a round of applause. I'm really ADHD, so my thoughts are all over the place all the time.
Well, Mary Ottley is an amazing human, and I know a lot of people are here because of that reason. But if you don't know Mary Ottley, please know her better. She's one of the great Swanee characters. Thank you all so much for coming. I can't believe I forgot to introduce this. Rob, I can't believe you didn't call me out.
That's what I was thinking.
I know that's why you're videotaping, I just realized. But it takes amazing people to support amazing people, so give yourselves a round of applause.
Yeah.
So much for coming. There'll be another one in 2 weeks on Swanee Stand, which is the new organization that works to talk about and raise awareness on fundamental human rights and ways to improve the well-being of everyone. So awesome. Thank you all for coming.
Ina, I have to get you on camera for the video. Ina, smile. Hi. There you go.